Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler's WPblab, episode number 83. Today's topic, we're going to be discussing starting an in-person community online with this guy named Andy Lara. But before we introduce him, we like to be rude and introduce ourselves. Bridget, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Bridget Willard. I'm the marketing manager for Give, the most robust online donation plugin for WordPress. You can find out more and read resources and tips for Giving Tuesday at givewp.com. We're also on YouTube. Subscribe to us and look at our tutorials and those kinds of things at youtube.com/givewp.
Nice. Man, the microphone makes you sound like 1,000 times better. I mean,
I know, right? Like, totally.
Right? You totally sound like a podcaster now. It's awesome.
Now I have my dream complete, Jason, of being a radio DJ. And
nice.
Jason Tucker's going to give us the weather.
Hi, I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter. My website is Jason Tucker, our blog, where I do a bunch of stuff over there. Feel free to go take a look at that. And Jason Tucker on most of the things. So if you're on Instagram or whatever, feel free to follow me over there. And Andy's over here watching TV instead of.
Wait! Where am I?
What's the score? What's the score?
What's going on?
I know there's football happening.
Oh man, no! If it was hockey, it'd be all on. But
yep. So Andy, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get into your history a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, you guys have quite the intros. If I tried, what would I do? I'd say like, hello, my name is Andy Lara, co-host and producer of the Vox Podcast. I'm also the creative director of Vox Community here in Placentia, California. It's something like that.
Good job.
Woohoo! You're hired.
Oh, wait. You can find me on Twitter at Andy_Lara and the Vox Podcast.
Good job, man.
Got it. You're hired.
Oh yeah. So my name's Andy. Yeah, I do, I guess, kind of two jobs. I produce a podcast with a friend of mine named Mike Erre. He's a former kind of mega pastor here in Southern California, and then I'm also the creative director at a church that we started from a podcast. So that is kind of the unusual thing. Oh, hey, look, we broke one of the rules. One of my kids actually almost arrived here in the garage. But I've been kind of working in church ministry and that type of thing for, I guess, about 5 years now or so. 34, got 3 kids, happily married of 7 years, and I live in South County, Orange County. And
nice.
So what else?
Well, I mean, you and I, we met together working at the same church, and Andy was our creative director. He was one that was making everything look pretty while I made everything look and work functionally. So it was kind of cool to have that tie between the two of us, and kind of learned a lot about Andy and the things that he does and stuff. So it was really interesting when he ended up going off to start this new church and kind of build all this stuff up. He kept talking about this podcast, and it was this podcast and this podcast. So I'm like, there's like a church involved in this as well, right? And he's like, oh, it's just a podcast, and then there's a podcast. So like, what was like that how did that start?
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting thing. I mean, Mike's story goes is that when he departed from EV3, he was landing nowhere, and however, if he's always been the type of teacher pastor that's kind of spoken into a lot of adversaries and very contrary to a lot of maybe the common contemporary church culture, if we want to look at it that way. And in a way that there was a lot of things that he wanted to talk about and wanted to say during his kind of career time at previous churches, but he never really had the freedom to say those things, mainly because when you're working for a church and working with elder boards and that type of thing. I mean, you'll find a lot of, big pastors have to be a little bit careful, and they kind of feel like they're a little bit under a net. And so when Mike stepped away, it was like, well, there's nothing. I mean, he has his friends and his peer group and all of his folks that definitely hold him accountable as far as how he holds theology and teaches and everything else. But there was just a lot of things he really wanted to talk about and say that he really couldn't before. So the best avenue was really for us to start a podcast. And so he chimed me in maybe about a week after he had left and kind of gave me some of his thoughts, saying, hey, I'd love to hear about what it's like to do a podcast, and if you have any ideas. And then, I think maybe there's a church somewhere in the mix out of this, but I think there's a lot of conversations I want to have first and see who kind of arrives to the conversation and see if there's a culture that is interested in the kind of things we want to tackle and go after. So
that's what's cool about that whole story is that the thing you were doing is happening online first before you even thought about let's build a business, let's build a nonprofit, right. Let's build a church, whatever the thing is that it ends up being. But you're starting out first as an online thing that can then turn into something that's in its physical form, right. That people can actually hold, grasp, and go to or do something with. So it's really cool to kind of see how that happens. And that's why I think it was a good idea to have you come on here, because of the fact that churches, just like any other type of organization, nonprofit, business, what have you, they all have this thing where they're trying to bring people to the thing that they're doing and being able to kind of broadcast that information out. So you can remind them, hey, this thing's happening. You should come check it out. Hey, here's a video of the thing that we're doing. You're not here. You should totally come. Hey, you're late. You can come to the next one. You have all those different ways of kind of reminding and instructing and helping and kind of bringing people to that event that you're doing.
And not just with churches, because remember, this is a WordPress show. Yep. This behavior, if we look at it from a behavior standpoint and not the subject matter,
mm-hmm.
The WordPress community functions exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. There's evangelism, there's doctrine, right? The WordPress way is our doctrine, the way we code, that's our theology. We meet around a subject matter. We make friends online. We go to meetups. We go to bigger conferences. We do it on a regular basis. In fact, I am a Christian who goes to more WordPress meetups than I do go to church. I spend whole weekends several times a year. Churches have retreats. So if we take out the part that may offend atheists in our crowd, the behavior is the same. So that's why I thought this is a really great subject, because in marketing nowadays, people don't want the hard sell, right, Andy? So the way we approach evangelism for a product or for a community is very similar to get that successful. So I wanted to draw that parallel before we lose a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Because this is what's happened. And in fact, since 4.8 added the events calendar and the WordPress dashboard, the attendance of our local meetups has gone up, I would say, anecdotally, at least 30%.
Definitely, yeah.
Communication, So this is why this subject is so important. I'm so glad you took the time to be on this show, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing too. Like I'm, for those out there that know me and have conversations with me, I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily like a typical contemporary Christian, for what it's worth. I mean, when I'm looking at what do I consider art, what do I consider effective in the social space, what do I consider effective storytelling? I mean, to be honest, I'm not looking at other churches. A lot of folks I work with do spend a lot of times looking at what other churches are doing. But to be honest, I'm really trying to look at what the regular marketplace is doing as far as how they're creating story, how they're engaging people, and what's exciting to actually do. And the most amazing thing I've learned about podcasting is like I've seen it as actually like one of the best tools out there that every small business isn't doing. Like it's the biggest thing I feel like they're kind of missing out on. And I've talked to a couple other creative directors about this, and because what it really is that it becomes a very low budget way to create transparency, authenticity, and the fastest source to the story than you could possibly imagine. I mean, just imagine if like Mark Zuckerberg actually jumped on a microphone every single week and just talked about where some of his thoughts are at and like kind of how he's seeing things and all of that. I mean, how much more people would love Facebook because they feel like they're getting to hang out with the guy who actually is the source of it. And you
it's like the fireside chats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can draw a straight line to any really profound business that's really doing something interesting. I mean, I think it's the same reason why like big vlogging YouTube guys work too. I mean, when you're sticking a camera in their face and you're watching him, you feel like he's looking at you. It's really, there's all this interesting psychology with how this is working. I mean, I can even draw a straight example with our own show. One thing we've added to the show probably in the past 6 months is a lot more Facebook live streaming, when we discovered that Google Chrome actually allows you to stream from your desktop. Like I thought forever you couldn't because I was only using Safari. And then one day I log into Chrome and I'm like, there's this huge button. I'm like, what the? And so So it's pretty wild. So Mike and I were doing a show from his office where I'd set up a camera, but it wasn't like I'm looking at the camera. It was kind of side angled, and like he was looking at me and I'm looking at him. So you're kind of like sitting in on a conversation. Well, he moves to Ohio recently, and the new model is then him just sitting looking at the camera, and we've got like 1,000 more views per video because of
it. Because eye contact.
Right.
It matters. Like the human interaction with our faces matters.
Right.
And that's why I'm in love with this subject, because the podcast is great, especially with video, because of that interaction. And in the branding that we do for work, we're finding that our ads with human faces perform way better.
Really? Okay.
Because we're wired in our brains to connect to other humans. Yeah. There are certain things that happen with our faces, micro expressions, intonation, body language, how excited people get, the speed of which they talk, like if you say, what do you do with WordPress, or what do you do with WordPress?
Yeah. So tell me, what do you like about the internet?
I know. They have totally different meanings, right? So you don't get any of that from text-based. And we're living in a world where people are changing their jobs every 2 years. We're working more remotely. We're not living around our families. People in our industry are working alone, and their relationships are text-based on Slack, Asana, Basecamp, Trello, Twitter, Facebook groups,
it's so true.
WordPress, Slack. They're not getting the human connection. And that's why bringing them into a room is so important. And even the way this show used to start, when it was literally on Blab, where people could hop on and hop off. That's why we're all still friends. Like, it's...
Yeah.
I met my coworker before he was my coworker because of this show. Kevin Hoffman.
Right. Well,
you hop in the chat room and start talking in there, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we should hire that guy.
Right. Well, yeah. So, can I tell you guys a little bit about like that kind of transition time from when it became from when it was a podcast to then it actually became a physical gathering? Because it's really interesting to see how that took place. So, I mean, like anything, I mean, what it came down to was, okay, how do we ask this community who's on board to actually do something with it? Like, actually, kind of do something physical. The thing I've learned from podcasting, being a huge listener for so long, and even my friends, and we talk about other different topics that they like, they feel after a certain amount of time of listening to one thing, you have to be doing something with it. Like, it almost feels like if you just listen to a podcast, you're stealing from it, unless you're either giving back to it or you're applying what's coming. Otherwise, why do you keep listening? Otherwise then it's just entertainment. Okay, fine. Like, if you love, Joe Rogan and other stuff like that, it's fun, it's great, it's funny. But, like health podcasts, you listen to that, and like after, 2 weeks, you're like, why am I even listening to this if I'm not going to do something about it? Right. So I think that was largely the kind of response that people got from what we were doing, what we were talking about. So it really just came down to saying, hey, if you're interested in getting together with us and maybe starting something, give us your email. And we pointed them to a website that drafted probably about 300 emails locally here in Orange County. Then a follow-up to that was saying, okay, hey, we're going to do 2 nights where we discuss what it might look like for us to start a church. And we invited them to that. And then the amount of people that came to each of those, I think, was maybe about 100 people each there. So then like it actually captured 200 people physically in a room to actually share with them. So we did 2 sessions, I think over 2 different nights, is about 100 people each. And, sharing with them, here's what we think it might look like for us to start a church. This is what we're excited about. And then from there, there's another ask to say, so would you commit to, potentially serving once the time comes to build this thing on a Sunday morning and participate, just to keep praying for it. And then also, would you start giving financially to it now? And that was about February, and we launched the church in the end of May. So we were we were already building core vision and DNA 3 months out before we actually launched the thing. So we launched our original core launch team was 80 people that we officially started with that were all volunteers. And so it was just a matter of then everyone else that came along. And so it's been a little bit over a year now. And we're at 300 folks that come to our church. Crazy. Yeah. And so
that doesn't happen. You know that, right?
That's what I've been told.
Well, and what's crazy about it is he's talking about 300 people that actually go to
engaged
the physically. Yes. But just because you don't go to the thing, I mean, he has people from all around the world that are attending church
Yes.
that aren't actually physically going to a church.
Yep.
So if if your customers are listening to your podcast to try to figure out, what is it like? I used to listen back in the day. It must have been like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Listening to the Evernote podcast. It's before they rebooted the Evernote podcast to be something totally different. But what it was like this: the two founders of the company would sit there and talk about all the crazy stuff that they do with Evernote. Like, oh, my wife, she went and wrote a handwritten note for me. So I pull out my phone real quick and I took a picture of it on Evernote. And then it it OCR scanned the text on it. And then I could actually read her horrible handwriting.
Right.
Like those were like the things that they were talking about on the show. But it was cool because they were talking about not just like the things that they're doing in real life, but they're also talking about like the thing that they're doing with the product that they're trying to pitch on the show.
Like Divi Chat. Divi Chat's the same way. Yeah.
So you have all these.
Yeah. We're talking about WordPress.
Or WordPress stuff. Exactly.
Hey, no, but I use Squarespace. Is that okay?
No. I mean, we wish you would.
Am I the atheist
but now that you said it,
WordPress community.
Here's
now
the
that
thing.
you said it, Andy, is that the ad that's going to play before the show is going to be a Squarespace ad.
Or Wix.
Yes.
One day it'll be a Give ad.
They're paying your bills.
I'm just saying, listen. We're inclusive in the WordPress, and we consider you pre-WordPress if you're using.
Are you Squarespace affirming?
I'm Squarespace affirming, and I am just saying that if you switch to WordPress, I know a really great donation plugin that you might want to use.
I've heard.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Oh man, I love it. This is awesome.
Yeah.
No, so you went from 80 planters to 300.
So here's the thing. Technically, we went to 450, and then we came back down to 300 because so Mike recently moved to Ohio due to some health reasons for his mom and actually himself. So we were at 2 services with 450, and whenever you have a major leadership change like that, you always kind of drop. So anyways, we dropped to 300. But for what it's worth, like giving actually didn't change. I mean, a lot of church planning conversation goes is that you figure about 20% of your church is actually giving. That's keeping the thing going. So it just kind of showed that even those 150 people that decided that they didn't want to stay with Mike not being there, those weren't the 20%. So that also tells us that the folks that are actually all in are in on the culture we've created, the church that it is, aside from the one person that it was. And there's a whole other philosophy that goes into what we do at the church. So that's a bit unrelated to what we're talking about today. But that's all that to say. We've been stable and everything since he, and the things he actually still leads it. So it's kind of crazy on the tech side. He does actually we do Q&A in our church every single Sunday, where you can literally ask anything. And then so we bring him in over Skype, and then he's actually teaching from Skype on Sunday this week. So we're using Microsoft's new tech box that is specifically designed for Skype in our tech room to actually, and it's like Skype TX1 is the software it's substantially better than like regular Skype on a computer. Audio is amazing. Latency is crazy low. Supports like 4 channels of video in and out. And so it's unreal, like bringing him in over Skype on a big screen, and he's just in his office, just like we are right now, talking to the church body. So he's one of 4 teachers that we have at the church. So he's just in a rotation, and he's still leading our staff and our team with what we're doing. And it's really just a bigger Vox community itself is just a small cosm of something significantly larger that we're working on. We do about 50,000 downloads per month on the show I have with him. And so we have people over the nation that are chiming in and kind of looking forward to a time when we're really doing something across the nation. So
Andy, awesome. I have questions. I haven't listened to your podcast, and a lot of churches do put their sermons out as a podcast. So can you talk to us a little bit about the format of the podcast before the teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's very much just a discussional podcast. I mean, when we started it, I was just a producer that was intended to kind of be behind the glass and as another person in the room with him. By episode 2 or 3, he was just like, no, you're just on the show. So I just became a co-host, and I just chime in and chirp at stuff. I'm more of the pop culture junkie, and I kind of act as the straight man that says, well, what about this or what about that? Or if he uses any kind of Christianese, I call him out on it and just, kind of be like, no one knows what that means.
So you're the sidekick like I am.
Yeah, exactly.
High
Yeah.
five.
Oh, Bridget.
Yeah, I mean the first episode was
I'm the Robin to your Batman. I'm cool with it.
Oh dang it. Oh yeah. The first episode title, number 1, was "Why is gay marriage good for the church?"
Oh, well, that's how you start. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you start. I mean, and given sure,
right out of the gate.
yeah, it was a bit of clickbait, but no, I mean, we did answer. We definitely did answer that what we mean by that. But you know, if that's any clue to really what we went hard after, and if it's just interesting because when I was still at EV Free with Jason, I started listening to maybe only about 2 or 3 other podcasts that were kind of cultural conversations that were kind of pushing a little bit back on contemporary megachurch, church culture / political church culture identity stuff. And now, since I've started the show with him, I could say there's probably at least 50 other shows out there that are kind of in the same vein, where it's not just recorded sermon from Sunday. It very much just is a conversational discussion based podcast where it's, you know, 2 guys in a room and just hashing out, you know, the issues of our day, you know, so that's a lot more what it is now. If it's interesting because there's a bit of, I would argue that we have a bit of an unfair advantage in the sense that with a lot of the other like larger prominent voices in that space, none of them are really coming in with a massive theological understanding, a huge like degree, you know, actual professor, teacher, former megachurch pastor personality. I mean, they're very much, you know, they're worship leaders, or maybe they're kind of in all these other spaces, but they're kind of not coming in with, you know, somewhat of a reconstruction of everything. You know, a lot of the guys are out there beating up hard on church culture and a lot of politics and everything going on, but not many folks are really offering a way from going from there into something that is a solvent into hopefully, you know, solving some problems opposed to just knocking them all down. So Mike does a great job of allowing permission for that conversation to take place, but at the same time being able to offer very, very good and wise solutions for how we actually approach a lot of these very difficult conversations. So I'd argue that's probably our unfair advantage when I look at the other shows that are out there talking about a lot of the same stuff that we are.
Well, having an expert in your field is always a good thing for a show, right, Jason?
Have one here, but we do just fine as much as we can.
Yeah, for sure.
So, well, I mean, what happens is, like, especially on WPwatercooler, the other show that I do here tomorrow, on the morning. So if you can take a look at that, but I find say, hey, you come in here, the person that actually knows what we're, and then we're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and then hopefully we'll be able to get a good bit that we're talking about. I think that's. You can have, especially like somebody like mine, and then somebody like you who is like just like Bridget was saying, kind of in person versus the online community aspect type thing. Where's the crossover happen between that? I mean, is it like, hey, we talked about this on the show, and now we're talking about it in the church, you know, and in business, would it be, hey, we talked about this thing on the show. Oh, and by the way, we're now selling this thing. Like, how does that work? How do you kind of pull those pieces together when it comes to that? Especially now that you have like essentially 4 different teachers that are all talking about this stuff.
Right. So I think the best way I can answer that is that one of the core convictions at Vox is that the church should be the safest place to talk about anything. So what that means is interesting. The technology has kind of informed that. I mean, our ability to sit down and do a podcast makes a lot of these very big conversations nuanced and relational and a lot more of a discussion rather than how does a teacher package a stance, a viewpoint, a theology on some big cultural thing and try to deliver it in 25 to 30 minutes on a stage on a Sunday morning and have it actually carry the nuance and everything else needed to really go after a very hard and difficult subject. That's been the biggest freedom I think Mike has experienced in all of this, is then realizing that it doesn't all have to hinge on those 20 minutes. Now that we have a podcast as an outlet to expand that conversation, a lot of folks that are getting to listen to this are now getting a much bigger picture of what teaching on, you know, whatever your pick is, hell. Let's talk about hell. You know, like that's the thing. So rather, you know, Mike did 7 teachings, I think, on hell through Christmas, right? But then we were able to bring on this guy named Preston Sprinkle onto our show, and he was able to talk about the 3 different views of hell from like, and he helped write a book with Francis Chan called Erasing Hell, and has actually changed his view on hell since he helped him write that book. So it's like, you know, us being able to listen to him, that now becomes a resource that we can point to with people in the church. So our team on Sunday morning, we have, for them, they have our podcast as a huge resource to all these very big conversations in the church that otherwise we kind of just wouldn't have. Like, I wouldn't feel really confident giving them a, oh, hey, well, listen to this Sunday episode that we talked about this. I mean, because it's not a conversation. It's just, you know, talking from a stage. You know, that's all it is.
So do you imagine that like it's like the DVD commentary track for the Sunday service?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, kind of in a way, it absolutely can. I mean, if in fact, this is what's great about this is, so literally right now, something I'm babysitting is I have Carrie Garcia, who is one of our teaching pastors at Vox, talking on our Facebook page live right now as doing an afterthought conversation about her Sunday teaching. So we did a whole teaching on love your enemy, and like we had all these people come up after just sharing like, man, like I'm really struggling with this, or I'm wrestling with this, like how can I, and this is kind of on the heels of Charlottesville, and you know, we kind of looked at it, I'm like, here, you know, yeah, it absolutely, do we denounce, you know, so much of what white supremacy represents. However, how do you still look past all of that to the human being that embodies it and realize that Jesus would have something to say for that person and does actually love them? Like, what does it?
So she's able to expand on that.
Yes.
Which, the way I'm looking at this, especially when we're looking at coming, you know, I know everybody's going to be listening to this at all different parts of the year and stuff, but you have something like the Apple Keynote that's going to be happening next week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If the executive folks on that, you know, over at Apple could hop on a podcast after they did their, you know, precisely, you know, built 20-minute or 2-hour rather, you know, whole presentation about here's all the phones I'm going to buy and here's all the stuff we're going to do and everything else, and actually like deep dived into some of this stuff.
Yes.
I could see how something like that would be a pretty interesting thing. I mean, I could even see if you're a WordPress developer and you're building a WordPress plugin or a theme or something, get on your YouTube channel or get on your Facebook channel, you know, your Facebook page, and say, hey, so we built this thing. It's this new thing. It's $29, blah, blah, blah. Here's what it's actually solving. And then you go through and talk about why it's, you know, solving the problem that you're having and kind of being able to work through all of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, in Bridget, you would understand this too. I mean, actually, Carrie's husband, he was like the former creative director for Easton Sports. And we talked a lot about, you know, being a creative director and looking at podcasting. And he's like thinking about all the times, like how difficult is it to tell the story of a brand and a product off of a label? You know, it's like you go to a store and buy something, and like, how do you look at a kid's aluminum bat and then understand the intention, the care, and the compassion of the person that created it? Right? I mean, it's like you would swing that bat a lot differently, and you take care of it differently, and you'd hold it and store it differently in your house if you had some kind of connection to the heart of the person that actually put that in your hand.
That's funny that you say that, because I don't really think of the logos that way, because I'm a relationship marketer. So I believe that when you have a relationship with the person, that gives meaning to the logo. Right. But I do have high praise for the industrial engineer who works for Coffee Mate and made the lid that snaps back closed. and I thought deep. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Lid. I've thought deeply about this. He's sitting around Thanksgiving. Everybody's saying what they did this year. And he goes, yeah, I made a Coffee Mate dispenser. And they're like, who cares? Like, but he's improved my life because that snaps back. I can dump the creamer in my coffee without it closing. When it closes, then it spills all over the place, right?
Right.
But that guy put his soul into something trivial.
Right.
Put his skill sets in or the same thing with the Folgers guy who realized a can is hard to grip with your hands. Right. But this industrial engineer figured out if you just put a couple of dents right here, then you can hold it because your hand can hold this. But holding round is hard. Right. So when we put our souls into our brands, I feel like that has meaning, you know? And when we offer up who we are in a podcast, that has meaning. And we see this in the WordPress community twice a year when Matt Mullenweg does his Q&A at Europe and US. And people line up to talk to him, and they feel like they know him, and they want to shake his hand, fist bump, high five, you know, because he's started this movement 14 years ago, this giant volunteer project. And but with a brand, anything inside baseball is going to be a great thing, you know?
Right.
So if you have time to sit around and talk to your customers or to interview them, or, I mean, bring it back to a business, like that's how you create the community is by building relationships with people, right?
Right.
So, and letting them know that you care, that they have this question. Like for you specifically, people have questions about hell or whatever, right?
Totally.
And so if you're not afraid to address it, if you're able to be bold and be serious about it, and be logical and not dogmatic, but still be empathetic, that is a huge win for anybody.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say that's our success, I think, has been hinged on exactly that. You know, that's and to your point, it's funny, it's just because podcasting just helps, I think, to draw a straight line to someone's ear, you know, that, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, I agree with you. Like, that's what, like, you take Apple as a perfect example. Like, yeah, Johnny Ive watching the promo videos and marketing videos, him talking about the design of something is absolutely captivating. But it's captivating because you're hearing and seeing exactly what you talked about, the nuance of how he talks about, you know, the beauty of an iPhone, you know, how you hold it in your hand. And I mean, it's just, it makes you're like, I want to hold that phone. You know, it all comes together. It's beautiful. Oh, Jason disappeared.
What? Really?
What? Oh, there he is. Yeah. So it's, you know, that's, you almost bounced out of there. So, I mean, that's, and of course, now you see churches did pick up on, you know, whatever we could talk about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, how important video became in the conversation for storytelling as a part of churches.
Right.
The problem is that we've got to a point where they've become so polished, so edited, so directed. Everything is ending in a red bow that when you watch it, you just, I mean, at least for me, I hardly believe them anymore.
Right. It doesn't feel real. Right.
And so, I mean, now, do I think that there is a way of doing that can do that? Yeah, absolutely. But you know what's a bit more captivating is that's why podcasting, I think, has stood out. Because if I'm sitting across from a person and getting a chance to hear their story and actually kind of ask questions back as they're telling it, and you're hearing that reaction time and you're hearing that, there is just this other realism that comes across, you know, through the audio or even in a video circumstance, that I think just resonates deeper. And it's the scary thing about it is that it's outrageously more simple than all the work and money that goes into glossing everything up. It just
This is why Periscope and Snapchat even exist.
Absolutely.
And wouldn't you say also, being a creative director, that this is also the trend that's happened in modern advertising?
Yep.
Nobody, I mean, yeah, we can watch the Jeremy Irons Squarespace ad and be moved that he's now a fashion designer or whatever, right?
Or
it doesn't
John
feel like
Malkovich.
me. Yeah, sorry. What did I just say?
Jeremy Irons.
Whatever. Okay, so some guy, John Malkovich, sorry. Yes, Jeremy Irons. Oh my God. Okay, so the point is, like, you don't see the flaws. And of course he has the money to start this ridiculous hobby that's probably a failure because he's not a fashion guy, right?
Right.
So, and really, you don't need Squarespace because you got the money to develop a website. You should be able to spend. You should be able to lay down $15,000 to get a good WordPress website.
Yeah,
this whole thing is ridiculous, and we know it's all bullshit. Oops.
Yeah, we know John Malkovich isn't sitting behind his computer on Squarespace being like, wait, what's injection code?
It's emotional, it grabs people, but it's not real, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we know that, and that's the thing with social media and all these tools, with everybody's a publisher now.
Right.
That's what the iPhone has done to us.
Yeah. So here's some of the language that I use to help with that is like, the way I see it is I say we're giving integrity back to the audience.
Ooh.
You know, that's like it's our way of
tweeted right now.
Yeah, it's like it's our way of saying, like, we actually believe the listener is smart. We actually believe that they can see through, you know, the BS, and it's like, why try to juke them? But then why not invite them to that conversation? I mean, it's funny. We have this funny saying at Vox Community, you know, it's a tight ship. Because, I mean, in a way, all of us on staff have actually come from, you know, relatively successful churches. Like, we know how to run a church and do a church. But it's like, yeah, well, sometimes like slides get screwed up and words don't work right. But it's like, are we going to go AWOL and completely like out the person who did it? It's like, no, that's dumb. But it's how many hyper narcissistic, you know, megachurch pastors are out there now that, like, if the show doesn't run perfectly smooth, like, you know, right on the clock, moment after moment, and everything goes, it isn't real for them. And then it's like, well, that's not real for the person in the room,
Right.
you know? So it's just that's been a really fun experience for us, is really kind of letting that fall to the wayside. And we still offer, like, you know, an experience for what it's worth at the church, but it's like, if it doesn't go right, no one's getting fired, you know?
So,
and it's
so my question to you, friend, is how much do you think the rise in popularity of servant leadership plays into this?
Who plays into what, where we've arrived as a church culture?
I mean, so you said we're giving integrity back to the audience.
Yeah.
To me, that's a form of service.
Sure.
And
Okay.
with Simon Sinek and all these guys talking about servant leadership,
Yeah.
we in the church, the three of us who've been in church leadership for a long time,
Right.
we understand this is taught in the Bible.
Right.
It's not new.
Right.
Okay. But now everybody talks about servant leadership, and there's no real leadership unless it's servant leadership. and the authenticity and all of that is the reasons for serving the people underneath you. And even in management,
Right.
Being the person that serves the people you're supervising
Right.
has been found to be more effective. So
Right.
in your podcast model, when you're serving your audience, like, are you acutely aware of servant leadership, or is it just part of your DNA, like you were discussing earlier?
Yeah. So part of the DNA, and like, this is definitely a Mike-ism, but also a very biblical ism, is like, you know, Mike always says, like, you know, I'm the biggest sinner in the room. So meaning, like, anything that he approaches, he assumes that he's the worst guy there. You know, so it's like, it puts him in a position to, you know, never acting judgmental, and, you know, always trying to be like, my role is to love and to serve and not to judge. Now,
Right.
You know, that there's tons of nuance to how that really plays out. But that also then, you know, plays into how we treat a lot of the circumstances. Now, we're smart enough to where when we look at topics and we look at all these different issues going on, that, yeah, sure, we're able to talk about them. We beat up on them. But all the while, like, we're also saying, Mike is like, yeah, he's like, my greatest sin is I love to judge the judgers. You know, it's just like, he's absolutely upfront about, like, the things that he wrestles with that make him out, that he's just like, yeah, here is the giant plank in my eye. This is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, so he's equally as, like, you know, sharing what that actually looks like. So as a way of, you know, our responsibility, you know, to how we look at the large audience that we have, like, for example, we got some interesting feedback on the last podcast that we did. If you guys are familiar, I don't know if you saw all over Twitter, the Nashville statement, are you guys familiar with that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's crazy deep, though.
Yeah. So we won't go. So I won't get into what that is. But so, like, for example, though, I mean, a lot of folks were asking us to respond to it, you know, because that's exactly the kind of issue that we would respond to and have a conversation about. Well, it's like, if you want us to respond, then you have to understand that, yes, this has become a platform in which we speak from, and Mike speaks from. So, you know, there's tons of nuance to it. If he's saying that these conversations about this topic are best done one-to-one relationally, you don't go after him saying, well, you're on a podcast talking about it, so you better practice what you preach. It's like, well, no, you wanted us to respond to it and talk about what we suggest, you know, our audience to do with it. So it's like, you can't, you know, as far as like us offering a service to folks, I mean, yeah, there's going to be that kind of scenario, and Mike is the first one to own anything, to say that, like, you know, hey, yeah, I don't have it all figured out, but I mean, he's like, I've been a pastor for 20 years,
right.
And like, he knows some stuff, so, you know, he offers what he knows. And the beauty of it is that, you know, like I said, the idea of giving integrity back to the audience is really just us saying, like, you know, we don't assume, we do our best not to over assume anything.
Right.
So it's like, we absolutely do assume that there's probably someone listening to our show that's for the very first time, and they may not be a believer. So it's like we don't assume that the whole audience is Christians. We don't assume that there's this inside conversation happening for only folks that have been a part of our audience. It's always like we're kind of talking to a parade. And so that's just this balance that we carry, that really our hope is to present a way that we could learn how to have loving and graceful conversations around a kitchen table, as a way that the church would move forward. And I mean, one thing we say is we're just not in the business of stancing and taking stances. And so everybody hates us because we're neither affirming or non-affirming LGBTQ. We're not, conservative or liberal in our politics. We're not. There's just so many things that people are like, well, you need to say this and you need to say that. And we're like, actually, both sides do have good things to say, and both sides are wrong on some things. And we actually think Jesus would be calling out both of those things. But like, why? When did we ever need to take a side? Like, that just didn't. That's a much bigger conversation. But all that to be said is that servant leadership, I think, does play a role, but I think Mike does model the idea of serving those who have basically come around it and supported the thing. One interesting I can say about the type of people that we've kind of grafted into the community as far as how we've developed both the staff and our teams. I kind of had, I worked at Apple for about 5 years prior to getting into church ministry. And so I definitely borrowed some of their stuff for team development and how they operate as an organization. So we built in a pretty hefty feedback model that allows our organization to kind of represent a flat model, meaning that we give absolute permission for anyone on our team to be able to give feedback to Mike, that is like something that they can do at any given time, given that they kind of at least follow, what that little structure looks like. So as a way that we're all committed to lifelong learning. So it isn't like, okay, well, he's the pastor. Well, you can't say anything to him. He just knows more than you. That just doesn't exist in our church. Yeah. And so, as a way that we're actually looking after to love and serve each other, we also recognize that we have something to learn from each other and at any time. And, we're going to disappoint each other one way or another, but it's just, how are we going to be ready to have really great, healthy conversations along the way?
So Andy, I have another question. So when you're building a community, it's really important to have, not just team cohesion with the leadership, but for people to have love and belonging, from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So how are you making these people feel like they belong?
Yeah. Okay. So our motto actually at Vox is safe to belong. So we worked in that language actually into our culture.
It's in the byline. Check that out. Wow.
Yeah, wow. Check that out. So here's my take on the word belonging. Okay. So I belong to my family. I am the oldest son of 3 children to my parents. Is my belonging to my family comfortable? And is it easy? Heck no. But it's a name that I carry. Like I belong to my family, but is the relationships with my brother, my sister, my dad, my mom perfect? Absolutely no way. But the byproduct of belonging is acknowledgement. It's like when you are able to create a way that each other can be acknowledged, healthier things take place in what those moments actually look like together and how you grow together. So the irony of something like safe to belong simply says we've created a space where you're safe to be uncomfortable. Because the bigger problem is in most churches is that once people get uncomfortable, then they don't fit in anymore. Because it's, they start asking pastors hard questions. They start asking each other hard questions. And all of a sudden, everyone's uncomfortable in tension. It's like, well, you know what? You just need to pray more. You just need to read your Bible more, brother. It's like you get into these other conversations, these pat answers about what it's like to live a life of faith. And all of a sudden, they're just like, no, I'm legitimately curious about this question. And no one can really answer it for me or really walk through it and process through it with me. So really what we're saying is that our way of belonging is really helping people to understand that there's permission for people in process. And so it's like safe to belong is actually more of a challenge to say, this is a welcome place where we can work out these really hard things together. And, if you're willing to come in and challenge and process, that means that you're actually a good fit. So it's like the only people that aren't safe to belong are those who tell other people you're not allowed to be here. So which is rare. And so that we come across that type of thing. So absolutely. We have, non-affirming LGBTQ or have non-affirming conservative Christians in the same room with affirming, liberal folks who love, our folks in the LGBTQ.
That sounds a lot like the WordPress community.
Yeah,
Totally.
right. Well, it's like Apple. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I worked at Apple for 5 years. And I'm
Right.
walking around. I'm like, what? It's the relationships I built and the friends that I built there. I'm like, this feels more like church than me going to church. Like, church is
Right.
just a bunch of people that think the same way. And if I think differently, all of a sudden I'm the weirdo.
Right.
Like, it's
And then they put Think Different on the wall.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm serious about this. Like, that's
No,
the psychological safety that's really important. And oh man, I wish this was a theological conversation.
I know.
But
I-
but losing my husband last year, I found the same thing, that I was more accepted in my imperfect state of faith
Mhm.
with my WordPress community than I was at church.
Yeah.
That if I was crying, I would not go to church because they would say, well, just trust the Lord.
Yeah.
And he's with Jesus. And I'm like, if somebody tells me we're serious with Jesus one more time, they're getting a throat punch. Because that's not really helpful to me.
that's coming from a
Right.
pastor's wife, by the way.
Yeah, I was a pastor's wife for 23 years. So, but
Well,
that's
that
what
goes
I'm
back
saying.
to the
Like,
integrity
that's
thing, Bridget.
that's the integrity thing. And I love this conversation because whether you're building a community, like we have a community around our product Give, whether you have a community around Apple, like the Apple fans, or WordPress or whatever, you have to allow people to speak. And when they are heard, when there's psychological safety, when they feel like they belong, when they have trust, they will speak. And when they're allowed to speak and they feel like they're still valued, that's how you have that community. It doesn't matter if it's a church or it's around a product or you're doing Taekwondo on the weekends. That is the key. It's so important. And I love that how passionate you are on this subject. And I think it's great.
Very cool. Yeah, it's been an unreal journey. I mean, personally, I've never been a part of something like this. I mean, this whole thing is bogus all the way. I mean, there's just like, I mean, from the onset of what started to what it turned into. I mean, there's just it's hard. I mean, the funny thing is, like, we have a handful of our staff who are like, if this thing disappeared, I don't know what I would do. Like, I don't know where I would go. Like, it feels, we feel like the oddballs and we feel like the ones kind of doing that. And we absolutely love the folks. I mean, now we have it's crazy. Out of the 300 people that come, 200 of them are actually serving on Sunday teams, so that are volunteers. So it's like, these are, 2/3 of our church at this point is actually volunteering on teams. I mean, they're drinking all the Kool-Aid. We've completely hooked them. But I mean, I'm kidding. But like, that's exactly that whole idea. Like, what the type of folks that have arrived, it's been really incredible to see what it's like to create a place where the idea of permission isn't this complacent concept where we're just not only saying, yes, is anyone welcome to come into this room, but we also really mean anyone is actually welcome to come in this room. And in addition to that, we can actually talk about these hard things together. Right. And it isn't hinged on what just happens in this room on Sunday. There's stuff beyond it. And it's not programs where if you just participate in this thing, you'll get healthy and better. We simply realize that conversations in relationship are the things that actually transform us and change us into being, just becoming better and healthy people. And that does not take place overnight. It's like, let's stop kidding ourselves into thinking that like one sermon with some big red bow on it is going to fix everything. I mean, that might be some kind of turning point, but by no way that end up being the solution. That's not even biblical. And so when we have, like, we're 91 episodes deep on the official podcast, and then probably another maybe 24 live Q&A sessions on Facebook that are actually that podcast plus, whatever, maybe 67 Sunday teachings now. The actual content that goes beyond the conversations have on Sunday are hours long. So there's there's no way for you to just sit and just say like, oh yeah, I'm just going to come on Sunday and just kind of take this as it is and whatever. I mean, yeah, you could, but I mean, like, there's no denying that we haven't offered a way to really grow in a very, very challenging and healthy way into faith. So
yeah, I mean, the ION ending on transformation and all those other words, it means process. And if I've had to explain this as somebody who used to teach children, women, I used to be a Bible teacher too. So like we're all buds here, and I'm losing some of our people. But the thing is, the concept is, we are evolving, and I think, and because just tenacious with our subject matter. This is so true. I wish we had this attitude with developers in WordPress. I would like to never hear, oh, he's not a real developer ever again, or she's not a developer because she only uses Divi, or he's not a developer because he uses Beaver Builder, or a front-end developer isn't a real developer, or because you don't know Flexbox, you're not a real front-end developer. And we do this in the WordPress community, even though we're inclusive.
Dang.
We get very pissing match going on with how we treat people, and we'll say, oh, you're not a developer, you just implement whatever. Am I in the WordPress back end? Oh, that's not the back end. The back end is running PHP. Whatever, I'm on the dashboard. What is it, Middle Earth and we're Lord of the Rings? Like, doesn't even matter. The thing is that what matters is we're all in the process of learning. And WordPress is self-taught. In a lot of ways, the way the church is self-taught. We have one person we listen to or whatever. We have several people we get input from, and we're growing and changing constantly. And who I was when Jason Tucker asked me to be on the show in October 2015 is not the same as who I am now. And we are all lifelong learners. And if we are lifelong learners, it therefore... if we are an inclusive community, the marketers are just as important as developers, and writers are just as important as, teachers or speakers, or somebody from Automatic isn't more qualified to teach at a WordCamp than somebody who has a one-person agency.
Yeah.
But, so if we all belong and if we all matter, and if our journey all matters, and collectively our journeys are similar but individual, going in the same direction, then all of those processes, all of those relationships, and all of it matters. And how we talk to each other, and whether or not we have psychological shit. Because here's the one thing that I don't like about the WordPress community that I think is bad for psychological safety. I'm just going to say it since we're getting out of the theology.
The theology of WordPress.
It's the trolling.
The Book of Bridget.
Well, I'm just saying, in the many ways, in the way that we bond in WordPress community is trolling and kind of digging on people. That's how we bond with each other. If there isn't a secret joke about you, like #Bridgeable, it's like you're not in. But at the same time, we struggle with imposter syndrome because we don't recognize that we're all in a process. So I think there's a little bit of that should be toned back to keep that psychological safety so important. And I'm really impressed with how you guys have done that. I don't think that people maybe on this who haven't been church planners or haven't built a church don't understand how amazing it is to have 300 engaged people, to have a volunteer staff that's less than 20%. And you look great. Just go. And that's my roommate. And also, here's the other thing: like in the WordPress community, it's all volunteer. It's all volunteer.
Dude, it's totally church. It's funny. It's church without all the doctrine and everything. It's
there's doctrine.
Wait. How does that?
The codex.
How does that work?
The codex.
It's just people trying to get exposure and just trying to get experience on things, and they just give their free time. Is that why? Or
yeah.
All right.
Yes,
Yeah.
and learning and doing is how it's exposure, but it's also giving back. Like for me, I'm acutely aware, Andy, that the reason why I have this job is because of the people before me who built this thing that they give away for free in the open source.
Right.
And then there's people that are translating. And it's funny because I had a conversation with somebody who was like saying, how come the WordPress handbook, the codex, or the handbooks aren't, which is basically our Bible, why aren't they translated in every language? Let's see. There is one book that the words don't change at all, and there's no deprecated code. And it's been translated for hundreds of years by the Wycliffe Foundation, who spends all of their resources translating, and it's still not done.
Dang.
So no, 14 years is the WordPress community. No, we're not going to have that translated. But we demand a lot out of volunteers. So here's my question at the end of the rant, because I always have a purpose.
Yeah.
So Andy, how do you keep those volunteers motivated without making them feel resentful about their contributions?
Yeah, you give them a term. You don't say you're lifelong volunteers. I'm not kidding. Like it's kind of as simple as that. We do a number of different volunteer appreciation events, and that's fine. You know, you do picnics and barbecues, and you work to spend time with these folks and meet them and treat them like real people. You know, not just people just swinging a hammer, but rather, I mean, we in a simple way we say, listen, here's the deal. Like we're asking you just to commit to 6 months. And saying that, like, kind of give everything you've got for 6 months, and it's for you and it's for us. So at the end of 6 months, we'll revisit. If you're still on and you're still in, great, then you sign up for another 6 months. Or if you decide to go and move on, then it's just like, yeah, blessings and be on your way. And like we treat that as the contribution. So it's like, because what you see in like volunteer burnout is the feeling of just infinite time. You're like, oh my gosh, how long am I going to do this before whatever it is you're trying to fulfill? But then when you say to someone like, hey, no, we want you to do this for 6 months. And even in a way, we will also say at the end of 6 months, we might come to you and say, hey, we actually don't think this is a good fit. And so it's a two-way conversation. So it actually helps them to feel like, their contribution is meaningful. There's worth putting the time in. They actually want to be a part of creating something. And yeah, given we've only been in church for about a year and that it's new and it looks a little bit different, then there's part of that core that people want to be connected to. So, I mean, it's not like that. I mean, and part of becoming a volunteer with us, at least the way it was the first year, we were making some slight changes for efficiency's sake, but like what it required to get on a team was already a lot of commitment anyways. You had to come to a new to Vox dinner where we basically shared with you all the vision and everything we're about and what it looks like to kind of participate with us. Then if you wanted in and you wanted to be on a team, we said, okay, then you're gonna come back and do team interviews. And every time we fed people. So this is all over food and dinner. So team interviews was then, I would sit at one table with 8 people, and we had, 4 other people on our staff that all sat at a table. So we're interviewing anywhere from 20 to 30 people, and we're interviewing them. So we're trying to understand where's their giftings, what are they good at, and then us already having a list of roles that we need to fill and realizing where would they best fit. So then at the end of that meeting, we hand them that list and say, here's everything that we need. Put a 1, 2, or 3 based on what is most priority to you and what you think you'd be good at. And then we talk about everyone at the end of that night after they leave and look at that list and say, nah, let's put them here, let's put them there. And so we try to really orient people towards what we think that they're going to be best at based on those interviews. And then third, they do another dinner with us where we do core training. And we train everybody the same, just like Apple did. So it's like whether you're a specialist or a genius or a manager, you go through the exact same training that, the lowest person does. So, and because it was really about how do you best represent the DNA that we're talking about? This isn't about, the specificity of what you setting up kids ministry. This is about when you meet a stranger or 2 dads walk in holding hands with their kid in a kids ministry, how are you going to react?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean for you to truly be hospitable to people and to love and care for people? And so it didn't matter who you are in the church. Like we wanted everybody to be able to practice like that kind of idea. So that's a very thin view of our core training, but everyone was trained the same. So by then you actually got added onto a Sunday team. So you see, it's like you were already committing to 6 hours of your time just to even get on a team in the first place. So there's just significant more ownership to people's roles and how those play out there. And so it just, yeah, I mean, I think that and the way it's just something different. I mean, I would want to be a part of it if I wasn't already a critical part of it. It's very interesting. It's very challenging and it's very interesting. So, I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I like the time. I mean, we've done that a little bit in the WordPress community with the organizers. They can only be the lead organizer for 2 years in a row.
Right.
And they're 6 to 4 month commitments anyway.
Yeah.
But like having that said so that they don't feel like if they give and then all of a sudden they're in this lifelong thing, it's good for them to go in and
right.
out.
And then there's the awkwardness
they also know when they're done.
Right. And the awkwardness of like thinking if you're burned out, now you got to go talk to someone about leaving. Then now you're in this posture of like, oh, are they going to be bummed? And did I fail them? Are they going to be disappointed? So immediately they're walking into a conversation that's already filled with negativity, right? No matter how that goes. And it's like you're putting them in that position already. So it's like, I mean, that's really, I think, that's been some of the stuff that's really kind of created such a positive atmosphere for what we actually do. And we've gotten great, specific feedback about folks that have shared that they've, the thing they've loved was just how welcoming people were and how it just felt like people were genuinely cared that they were there. And it wasn't just a hello at the door. It was being sought out by some of our team members that chased them down and then remembered their name the second or third time that they came. I mean, it was just those tiny little details that caused a lot of our attenders to realize there's something there's something else going on here than just the norm. And so it's just, yeah, the podcast has just truly represented our way of saying we really believe and truly believe that what happens on a Sunday morning at a church, the conversation is outrageously larger,
Right.
you know, but it's like that. And that the models we've been living in for the past 50 years to do that just honestly just don't suffice anymore. And frankly, social media has become such a massive audience, and we treat that audience seriously. You know, it's just we don't treat them any different than the folks that are showing up and actually helping the physical gathering take place. So I think that's part of it too, is churches kind of need to come around the corner to realize that their online audience is equally as valuable as those who are sitting in the seats. And I know that's hard for them to understand from a dollars kind of point of view, but I know that's the truth.
So here's
what's funny is, oh, sorry, Bridget.
Sorry.
Continue.
So I was going to say, this is an 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock. It's a 1 hour show. I would love for you to come back. I think Jason will agree with me, to talk about treating your online audience as an important part of your audience, as a legitimate audience. Would you come back again on our show?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I was just going to say the same thing. I was going to say, you know, we used to do this show as an 1.5 hour long show. And Bridget and I would be like, we'd be about like 65, 70 minutes into it. And we're like, oh my gosh, what the heck? We are like, come on, hurry up, like make the time go faster. But everyone in the chat room is going like, dude, it's been an hour? That's insane. I can't believe that. And so, Andy, I agree. I agree with Bridget. Thank you very much for being on the show and hanging out with us and talking with us and stuff. Andy, can you tell us a little bit about where they can find you on social media and stuff, and then where they can find the content that you guys are putting out?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at Andy_Lara. Also, the podcast is on Twitter at the Vox Podcast. You can check out the podcast at voxpodcast.com. Our local church community here in Orange County is voxoc.com. And Mike Erre, who is the talent that runs the whole thing, is at Mike Erre, MikeErre.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. I want to say thank you for all the folks that helped us out with our show notes. We really appreciate that as well. Cheryl, Sherry, you guys do an amazing job. Sometimes James Tryon helps out as well. Thank you very much for helping us out with that. We really appreciate it. It makes it so much easier for people to be able to consume this content, find it quickly and easily, and be able to get a little bit of SEO juice out of it. So I really appreciate that. Go over to our website at WPwatercooler.com. You can click on the links there to subscribe. If you are enjoying this content, WPwatercooler.com/subscribe is where you can find all that stuff. If you enjoyed this stuff, hit the little thumbs up button, hit the little share button if you really want to. I would appreciate it. And if you don't like it, hit the share, the thumbs up button twice. It just turns it off. No big deal.
I was gonna say.
All right, folks. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
Bye.